Welcome, I'm Bastet. I'll be running your operation. The project's official name is the Adventurers' Research of Abnormal Civilian Experiences, or Project Arrowace for short, to investigate the unusual occurrences that have been happening everywhere recently. I've hired you all for your indisputable military prowess.
I'm going to be honest, I think we should run.
Your academic expertise.
I don't know, I'm not a wizard in real life.
And your hands-on experiences.
Tentacles belong in the ocean!
I also lost all my food, so Delphi, in a few hours you might start looking really delicious.
Can everyone please roll for initiative?
Oh, I nearly cussed so hard.
Deck of Many Aces is an actual play podcast made by an all-aromantic and asexual cast and crew. You can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or wherever else you listen to podcasts, releasing every other Friday. You can follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at Deck of Many Aces.
This Snazzy Tapir production is made possible by our patrons. If you'd like to join them, head over to patreon.com/snazzytapir to get early access to new episodes, access to the members-only Discord, and our exclusive monthly newsletter. Now, on with the show. Hello and welcome to A Game of One's Own, a podcast dedicated to solo and duet tabletop role-playing games. I'm your host, Maddy Searle. My pronouns are they, them, and today I'm continuing my playthrough of the wonderful game Death of the Author, designed by Samantha Leigh of Blinking Birch Games. Last we left off, vampire hunter Kiera met a mysterious vampire called Frederick Langley. Frederick kidnapped Kiera's girlfriend Evie and warned her not to harm any of his minions, or Evie would face the consequences. Kiera heard from an old schoolmate that Evie had been spotted in the industrial estate, but instead, Kiera found the dead body of a young woman wearing Evie's coat. She is now more determined than ever to rescue her girlfriend and defeat Frederick once and for all. Meanwhile, the author of this story is watching Kiera carefully and urging her to prove herself, or else she will experience heartbreaking loss. Before we continue on to Chapter 3, I needed to see how the author was reacting to Kiera's actions in the story. I drew the Magician upright. This card symbolises resourcefulness, power, and inspired action. Chapter 2, Author's Message. Kiera stepped away from the body and pulled out her phone to dial 999. She couldn't just leave them there. As she pressed the phone to her ear, she didn't hear the voice of an emergency services operator, as she would have expected. Instead, she heard a whisper, so faint she was almost convinced she was imagining it. But after a few seconds, the whisper became louder, and was joined by countless others. Kiera listened as hard as she could, trying to make sense of this whirling cacophony. Suddenly, a single voice rose above the others. It sounded like the whisper she had heard outside Cafe Mythos. Interesting. You could have taken your anger out on the girl in the cemetery, but you didn't. What does that have to do with anything? Kiera said. What the fuck is happening? How can I save Evie? Keep making choices. I'll be watching, the voice replied. And all at once, the whispers were silenced. Now it's time for Chapter 3, which uses the Suit of Cups. For the first scene, I drew the Page of Cups reversed, which gave me the following prompt. You learn that your friend has been dishonest. I chose to let this prompt stand. Chapter 3, Scene 1. After taking a moment to ponder the strange, whispered message, Kiera dialed 999 again, and told the emergency services everything she knew, minus the weird supernatural shit. When the police arrived, she did her best to seem cooperative, despite knowing that they were way out of their depth, and that the best thing she could do was fix this mess herself. When they finally let her leave, she started walking deeper into the industrial estate, but stopped when she realised that the officers at the crime scene were discussing the Evie Littlewood case. She turned a corner as casually as she could and found a convenient alleyway within earshot. She crouched behind a pair of recycling bins and strained to hear the officer's conversation. The younger of the two, who had introduced himself as Constable Jenkins, was saying, "That Kiera kid said the victim was wearing Evie Little's coat. It has to be connected. And what with that fugitive on the loose? Sergeant, what the fuck do we do?" "Don't jump to conclusions," said the sergeant. "Stranger coincidences have happened. I think that looking into Evie's recent movements should be our focus for now, while we wait for forensics to look at this. What did you find out from her mother?" "Not much. Sounds like Evie was doing pretty regular teen stuff, to be honest. Though there was something a bit weird. She told her mum that she had some kind of maths tutoring on Thursdays after school, but the staff at Cafe Mythos says she was always there on Thursdays. Why would she lie about that? I don't know. Might be worth looking into." Kiera's heart began pounding. Evie had lied to her mum about their Thursday cafe dates? Why? Then she remembered that Evie had been struggling in maths classes all year. Evie's mother was very academically oriented, to put it lightly, so fibbing about extra tutoring to keep her mum off her back at least made sense. But nonetheless, the thought that Evie was capable of telling a lie like that was unsettling. Had she ever lied to Kiera? But of course, Kiera had lied to Evie countless times. Evie had no idea that Kiera was the town's protector. Kiera felt her face flush with shame. At this point, the officer's conversation was cut short by a phone call, which prompted them to start heading back to their car. For now, Kiera was left alone with her thoughts. For the next chapter, I drew the Queen of Cups upright. The prompt for this card is, you learn something of your friend's history that horrifies you. I decided to use my reversal move for this chapter to change the prompt to, you learn something of your foe's history that horrifies you. For the author's response, I drew the Hierophant, reversed, which symbolises challenging tradition. Chapter 3, Scene 2. Kiera started heading back into town, hoping that a brisk walk would help her think more clearly. Doing her best not to think about Evie, she decided to focus on Frederick for now. He was clearly a vampire, or something vampire adjacent. He could move a considerable distance in the blink of an eye. He claimed to have accomplices of some kind, probably other vampires. According to that news report, he was a known fugitive. Maybe that was a lead. Kiera took out her phone and started Googling. She found some articles covering the same story as the news report, but no additional information. She tried searching for the name Frederick Langley and found a dentist, an accountant, and a teacher. Very useful. She found herself wondering how old Frederick was, and how far back his history really went. She found a newspaper archive website and searched his name again. She came across an article from 1912, which mentioned a Frederick Langley in connection with a series of murders in Wiltshire. As she read on, her blood ran cold. An entire village near Chippenham had been massacred, nearly 500 people. When the authorities came to investigate, they found Frederick and deemed him one of the few survivors. But when the police tried to find him again for further questioning, he had disappeared without a trace. Whatever happened to her, Kiera thought, she could never let this happen to her town. My next card was the Nine of Cups reversed. This gave me the prompt, a test of trust leaves you shaken. I used my defiance move to change the prompt to, a test of resolve leaves you shaken. For the author's response, I drew the Chariot upright, which represents overcoming challenges. Chapter 3, Scene 3. Before Kiera could take in the full horror of everything she had just learned, she heard a scream. Following the sound, Kiera rushed towards the nearby play park. She saw a young man, no older than 20, being grappled by a burly woman in a navy trench coat. There was also a lithe, older woman in a black suit perched on a climbing frame. She leered at the young man as he struggled in vain to free himself. "This one okay, Enid?" said the burly woman. "He'll do just nicely," the older woman replied, hopping down from her perch. "Lucky you, pet," Enid said to the young man. The moonlight glinted off her fangs as she smiled. "You won't have to see everyone else in this town die. You get to go out quickly. But I can't promise it will be painless." Kiera rushed into the play park and yelled without thinking, "Stop! Let him go!" "Ah, perfect timing, Miss Protector," said Enid. "The boss will be thrilled when we bring him your head as a trophy. But first we have to deal with this appetizer. Hold him still, Lexa." Enid grabbed a clump of the young man's hair in one hand and yanked his head to one side, leaving his neck exposed. Kiera remembered what Frederick had said about harming his kindred spirits, but she couldn't watch this man die in front of her. Maybe she could save him without putting Evie in further danger. She grabbed her scythe from her backpack and leapt towards Enid. Her scythe slashed the air just inches from Enid's face as the vampire darted out of the way. "Lexa, forget the boy. Help me with this pest." Lexa loosened her grip on the young man and pushed him aside with a growl. "Run! Get out of here!" Kiera shouted. He did as he was told and fled. As the pair of vampires advanced on her, Kiera made a dash for the swings. She stood on one of the seats and used the momentum of the swing to launch herself into the air. She made a 3-point landing on the other side of the play park fence, rushed around a corner, and dove into a cluster of bushes. She tried to slow her breathing and stay as still and quiet as possible. She hoped against hope that she had done enough to throw the vampires off her trail. All she could do now was wait until they left, or until they found her. It's time once again to check in with the author and see what they think about Kiera's story so far. I drew the sun reversed, which has meanings of pessimism and sadness. Chapter 3. Author's Message. Kiera closed her eyes and waited. She listened intently, trying to hear whether the vampires were nearby, but she could only hear the rustling of leaves. When she opened her eyes, all she could see was darkness. The bushes, the play park, the town were gone. All that was left was a void. An echoing, booming voice reverberated through the air around her. "Perhaps I created an impossible challenge. Although you found some small victory here, it may be that you are simply doomed to fail." "What do you mean? Why would you give me an impossible challenge? I'm doing everything I can to save her, to save everyone." Suddenly, Kiera was falling through an infinite emptiness, falling through nothing to nothing. And then she heard the rustling of leaves and felt grass between her fingers. She was back. Now we can begin the 4th chapter, which uses the suit of wands for its prompts. For scene 1, I drew the 3 of wands upright. The prompt for this card is, "Your greatest secret is revealed." I chose to keep this prompt as it is. Chapter 4, Scene 1. Kiera took a few more minutes, huddled in the undergrowth, to make sure that Lexa and Enid had really gone. At last she stood up, her legs and back aching. She pulled out her phone and found that there were several missed calls from her mother. She instantly called her mum back, but got no answer. Shit. Kiera ran as fast as she could back to the house. The winter chill made her lungs sting as she sprinted. When she finally arrived, she saw her mother through the upstairs window and an indistinct figure standing in front of her. Kiera burst through the front door and scrambled up the stairs. Her mother was backing away from Frederick Langley, his grin wide, his voice gloating. "Well, Miss Parkin, it seems that the prodigal daughter has returned." Kiera's mum turned to look at her, confusion and fear twisting her features into a tragic mask. Is it true? You're a vampire hunter?" Kiera considered a dozen different lies that she could tell in the span of a few seconds, but looking at her mother's face, she knew she had to tell her the truth. "Yes, I am," she said. Her voice shook. "And he's a fucking vampire!" "Well, it seems that my work here is done for now," said Frederick. "Good luck dealing with this little bit of emotional fallout, dearies." After blowing Kiera a sarcastic kiss, he glanced out of the window and disappeared without a sound. Kiera ran to the window and saw Frederick on the street below. He waved and disappeared again, without a trace. For the second scene of Chapter 4, I drew the 4 of Wands upright. The prompt for this card is You Lose Hope. I used the reversal move to change the prompt to You Lose Control. For the author's response, I drew the Lovers reversed. This card can represent disharmony or imbalance. Chapter 4, Scene 2. So it is true, Kiera's mother said. What does this mean? Why did you hide it from me? You know how ridiculous it sounds, Mum. Like a fucking teen drama. I didn't think you'd believe me. Well, considering I just saw a man blink out of existence in my own home, now I'm inclined to believe a lot of things. Kiera's mum slumped onto the bed. Oh, said Kiera, standing awkwardly by the door. What is happening, Kiera? That man, Langley, he said... Oh, God, this is just so much. I know, Mum. He crossed a fucking line bringing you into this. Sorry, I'm swearing a lot. I think the swear jar is the least of our concerns right now, Kiera. I need to save Evie. Before I got here, did he give you any clues about where he might be keeping her? Asked Kiera. Oh, sweetheart, I'm so sorry, her mother said. I can't think about how I feel right now. I just need to do something. All right, Kiera, let me think. He did mention something about a mausoleum? I don't know which one, though. Kiera leafed through her mental maps of the town cemeteries. In her opinion, there was only one that would be big enough to house Frederick Langley's ego. The Knightley family's mausoleum. Thanks, Mum. That's exactly what I needed. Kiera turned and ran back down the stairs. Wait, Kiera, don't go, not yet, her mother called after her. Kiera channeled all her fear and doubt and sadness into a roiling red-hot fury. She didn't care whether she'd survived this anymore. She didn't care that Evie had lied. She only cared about ripping Frederick Langley to shreds. For the final scene of Chapter 4, I drew the Ace of Wands upright, which has this prompt. The place you call home is destroyed. I used my final defiance to change this prompt to the place you call home is safe for now. For the author's response, I drew the Strength card, which has meanings such as courage, persuasion, and compassion. Chapter 4, Scene 3. Kiera found herself at the door of the Knightley family mausoleum. It was a neoclassical building, with columns and a Latin inscription. Memento Mori. The doors, which were usually chained shut, were now ajar. She kicked them open and saw Frederick, Enid, and Lexa standing over Evie. Evie was gagged, and her hands and feet were tied together with rope. Her eyes were red, and her face was bruised. Oh, there you are, darling, said Frederick, stepping forward with a flourish. I could have kept toying with you for goodness knows how long, so perhaps it's for the best that you found my little den after all. I'm glad that me fucking destroying you and your kindred spirits fit so nicely into your plans, said Kiera. Ah, the hubris of youth. I remember it well. All right, my dear. If you're so keen to fight, let's get it over with. Kiera grabbed her scythe and ran at Frederick with a scream, but of course he just blinked out of the way of her strike. Kiera crashed into a tomb and felt Lexa's hands close around her throat. Before Lexa could tighten her grip, Kiera slashed at her left arm with the scythe. Lexa recoiled in pain, giving Kiera just enough time to swing around with the scythe and behead her. Lexa's head bounced on the marble floor of the mausoleum once, twice, before disintegrating in a cloud of ash. Enid snarled and leapt towards Kiera, but Kiera ducked and swiped at Enid's kneecaps. Enid cried out and crumpled to the floor, allowing Kiera an opening to slice cleanly through Enid's neck. The dust that was once Enid fell to the floor and mingled with the residue that was once Lexa. Kiera now turned the full force of her rage onto Frederick. His sneaky little disappearing act would continue to be a problem if she didn't figure out a way to stop it. Glancing at the remnants of his allies on the floor, Kiera had a flash of inspiration. A plan began to form that she desperately hoped would work. Frederick clapped his hands slowly and said, Well, darling, that was actually a little impressive. Such a shame that sweet little Evie will have to lose a hand now, right in front of your eyes. As Frederick drew a dagger from his coat and turned towards Evie, Kiera knelt and grabbed a handful of ash from the floor. Frederick paused and looked back towards Kiera, clearly hoping to drink in the abject terror on her face. Instead, Kiera flung the ash into Frederick's eyes. She had theorised that Frederick's power was based on sight. Considering everything she had seen of his abilities and the distances he could travel, the theory seemed to fit. If he was blinded, perhaps his power wouldn't work. Frederick blinked frantically, unseeing and panicked. Kiera sprang forward, scythe in hand, and severed his neck with a single clean stroke. As the final explosion of ash danced in the air, Kiera hurried to Evie's side, pulled off her gag, and started cutting the ropes that bound her. Once Evie was free, they hugged so tightly that Kiera could barely breathe, but it felt so good. She knew that hard conversations were in their future, about the lies they had both told, and they would talk about all of it. But right now, nothing else in the world mattered, only that they were in each other's arms. Now it's time for Kiera to confront her author. For this last chapter of the game, I needed to consider what the story means to the author. I have one defiance to use on the final prompt, which is, you meet your author. They are no longer in control. You say your piece, you act without mercy. I'm going to use my last defiance to change the final sentence to, you try to understand. Chapter 5. When Kiera finally pulled away from the embrace, she was back in that deep, dark void. But this time, the voice she heard didn't echo around her. There was a woman kneeling in front of her, and she was crying. This woman looked strangely like Kiera, but older, maybe late 20s, early 30s. She was wearing pyjamas and a bulky cardigan. Kiera knelt down and said, "This is your story, isn't it?" The woman looked at her and nodded. "Why did you do it? Why did you put me through all of this?" "I was scared. I am scared. But I wanted to write something exciting, something dramatic, something with high stakes. But Evie, she didn't deserve to be the fucking damsel in distress. I needed to test you, to put you through something horrible, to see if you could come out the other side." "Well, I guess I did, so what the fuck does that mean? Did I pass your little test? Can I just live my life now without being afraid that my girlfriend or my mum or my town will be taken away from me?" "I didn't think you would pass the test. I thought you were selfish. That I was selfish. And that everything would end in tragedy. But it turns out I was wrong." The woman smiled at Kiera through her tears. "You changed things. You made yourself a happy ending. Something I can't even do for myself." Kiera paused. This person was the reason for all the fear, despair, and anger she had felt. Part of her wanted to throw this woman into the void, never to be seen again, so that no one else would have to feel what she felt. But as she looked at the woman's face, it was clear that something had changed for her. Maybe things could be better for both of them from now on. "But I think you can give yourself a happy ending. It won't be easy, and it won't be perfect, but it can be happier than it is now, at least." The woman got to her feet and held out a hand to Kiera. "There you go, surprising me again." As their hands touched, Kiera felt herself falling once more. No, not falling. Flying. And that's where our story ends. Thank you so much for listening to my playthrough of Death of the Author. If you want to try Death of the Author for yourself, there's a link in the podcast description to the game's itch.io page where you can buy a PDF copy or order a physical copy. You can also find a link to Sam's socials or more of their amazing games in the description. Thank you again for listening to this episode of A Game of One's Own. Our theme music, as always, is by James Barbarossa, and this week's episode also included music by Kevin MacLeod. If you'd like to support the show, head over to patreon.com/snazzytapier for all the bonus goodies. You can follow the show on social media at A Game of One's Own, and find out more about my work at snazzytapier.com or at Maddy is Abstract on social media. See you next time for more weird stories.